Hello, and welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today, we are going to talk about sexual bereavement. Yep. Mom, you might want to turn this one off if it'll be uncomfortable for you to listen to me talking about sex. And obviously, content warnings here. There will be discussions of things of a sexual nature, so if you have young ones around and you don't want them to listen to this, there won't be any graphic detail or anything like that. So no worries about anything too graphic. But, you know, if you have someone around you don't want to be hearing about these types of subjects just yet, you might want to save this one for later. Okay? Awesome. So, yeah. So what's sexual bereavement? Well, this is probably a term you may never have heard before. I hadn't until semi-recently, because it's one of those things that once you hear about, you're like, well, yeah, that makes total sense. But it's not one you think about. And why? Because nobody talks about it. Like a lot of disenfranchised griefs, which we've discussed disenfranchised grief. Go back and listen to that one if you need to. But this is something nobody talks about. It's not in many of these self-help books and podcasts and articles and things and media on grief. They don't talk about this end of stuff. So we're going to do that right now. So sexual bereavement is, exactly what it sounds like. It's grieving the loss of a sexual partner or sexual function or anything around your sex life, basically. It could even be, a breakup, a divorce, things like that. But again, it's not something people talk about very much because it's so taboo in our society. And, I respect that of others. I won't discuss sex lives unless people want to. But it's one of those things we just don't really talk about because it's so private and we tend to keep anything of a sexual nature to ourselves, right? Which I think one can argue maybe that's not necessarily healthy and we need to talk about it a little more openly. This coming from me is weird. Those of you who know me know I get a little uncomfortable on discussions of this nature, but it's important to talk about sex and sexual health. But that's for a different podcast from a different person somewhere else. This we're just going to start talking about the actual grief part. And our sex lives, depending on the person, can be a really big part of your life. But more importantly, it's a huge part of intimacy with your partner, whoever that may be. And it's an expression of closeness and love and interaction with your partner and the person in your life. And when that's gone, it can be devastating. One group that's drastically left in the dark on a lot of this are older adults, senior citizens. Putting your own personal thoughts aside, guys, senior citizens still have sex. They still have very active sex lives. In fact, a lot of the baby boomer generation that's getting older are kind of shining a light on the fact that they are still having sex. They're still very sexually active. Talk to anybody that works in a nursing home. I worked in a nursing home for a short period of time when I was in high school and early college, and I have stories of some of the gossip that went around that place. So the sex still happens, guys. It's as long as the physical ability is there, it will still continue to happen. And for older people who lose their partner or maybe lose their sexual function, will go through a grief about that. It's hard when you lose that intimacy with somebody, especially if it's a partner you've been with for several decades. And, your body and their body are just so connected in a way, and to have that gone, it's like losing a part of yourself. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this is considered a disenfranchised grief, or one that is not normally discussed or not openly accepted by society for a lot of reasons, because it's such an intimate matter and something not often discussed. But there are also a lot of hush-hush around sexuality, even when it's still happening, or when people are still young and healthy. There are types of relationships that not everybody wants to discuss. There are polyamorous relationships, extramarital relationships, LGBTQIA+ community relationships are a lot of times people turn their back on that or turn their face away because it upsets them or bothers them in some way, shape, or form, and they don't want to acknowledge it. So when those parties lose a sexual partner or a person in their life or a relationship or sexual function, it's doubly hard because you get your cisgender white person who goes to their psychiatrist saying, look, I'm really upset because, I'm really sad. I'm really hurting because I've lost this sexual part of me as well. But for somebody, part of these minorities or in these communities that are already shunned from society, when they want to try to discuss this thing, it's even harder because they feel like they can't. At least unless, they have a safe space they can do that. And gosh, I hope you do. But grieving the loss of sex can be so isolating and so lonely for a lot of different reasons, but mostly those I mentioned up above. So it's absolutely a legitimate grief response too. And I have heard a lot of questions from those who are grieving a significant other, partner, spouse. After a long period of time, they start asking, they shyly want to ask, when is it okay for me to have sex again? And the answer to that is always, it's up to you. It's when you're ready, But I think some people feel in a way that they're betraying the person they've lost because they want to move on and have a sexual relationship with somebody else. So that's up to you and your counselor or therapist person, or, you and yourself and this new partner as far as what your comfort level is and how you feel about it. So when somebody is grieving in bereavement and have lost somebody, they might start feeling the loss of the sexual part of the relationship and start thinking, oh, I'm icky, I'm gross, nobody ever thinks about this kind of stuff. I must be weird and perverted. And no, absolutely not. You are not weird and perverted whatsoever because you've lost this part of a relationship. I've talked about in previous episodes, when you're grieving somebody, you're not just grieving the loss of them, you're grieving all those little intricate little pieces and parts of your relationship. And this is one of those. It's not just the person themselves, it's everything they brought to your life. And this is part of that. So you are absolutely normal if you feel a loss of sexual desire, an increase in sexual desire. Anything you might be feeling regarding this is going to be normal, okay? So you're normal and it's fine. There's also a form of grief around loss of sexual function. Specifically, I've read a lot of articles and information and researches on men who lose their sexual function after prostate cancer or just age, and it can be absolutely devastating for them. And men are far less likely to be open about things like grief. And I'm not saying they all are, but statistically, it shows that men are less likely to be open about their grief in general, let alone something around this. And it's also a stigma. It's a stigma for men to lose that part of themselves. So it's even harder because they, may feel like they're not, quote unquote, a real man anymore. But you still are, I promise. You're still a man. You're still a real man. It's not what your body does. It's what you do. It's who you are and how you react to the world that makes you who you are. So don't ever feel like you're not a man anymore because something like this happens, okay? And it is perfectly normal to grieve the loss of your sexual function. Some people will lose just straight up libido in their life as they get older. I'm not saying this happens to everybody, but it can and does happen to some folks. They just don't have that desire anymore. Their libido goes down. It could be medical. It could be emotional. It could be a lot of different things. It could be hormonal. Our bodies change as we age, you guys. Believe me. I know. But our bodies change and our libidos change and things might ebb and flow, and sometimes there's a grief with that. Like, why am I not as intimate with my partner anymore? Why am I not feeling these feelings of desire anymore? Is something wrong with me? Am I a freak? Am I crazy? And it can cause so much grief. And no, you're not a freak, and no, you're not crazy. if it's something like that, you might want to talk to your doctor just to make sure something isn't going on in your body that is wrong, something that is, a medical problem. Because there are certain diseases and medical conditions that can cause a decrease, and medications. There's a lot of medications that will cause a decrease in libido. A lot of antidepressants do that. So just keep an eye on your side effects for your medications. As far as trying to work through your grief or on sexual bereavement, just as always, accept your feelings. They're valid. Loss of sexual intimacy is completely normal, and it's hard. It is another grief. If your sex partner is still alive, but they've lost their sexual function, it's not you, but it's your partner that has lost his sexual function, keep communication open, okay? I can't express enough how important it is to talk to each other. If something's going on with one of you, don't try to ignore it because you're embarrassed or upset. Talk about it. I'm sure you can find other ways to support each other intimately if you can't, if the actual act of sex can't happen. Find other ways you can be with each other and share your intimacy so you don't lose that, because it's so important in relationships to keep that intimacy and that connection to each other. So please, please, please communicate with your partner. Never compare your loss to another person. Somebody might lose their partner and go a little wild and start having lots of relationships with other people, and you lose your partner one day and you don't do that. That's okay. Everybody's different. So just any grief, never compare it to somebody else's. It's kind of pointless to do that because we're all different. As always, if it's interfering with your daily life or if you need help, please seek professional help. A counselor, therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist. Again, if it might be medical, talk to your doctor. You might need an adjustment in a medication you're taking. There could be something else going on, so make sure you get yourself checked out. Grief it's complex, it's big, and there's a lot of parts to it. Sex is the same way. So don't be surprised if you lose a partner and you start grieving the sexual intimacy you had with them. It's perfectly normal. Gosh, I kind of feel like a broken record sometimes because I just keep saying, it's normal, whatever you're feeling's normal. But that's the whole point of this podcast. I want to normalize and destigmatize every grief I possibly can to let you know that if you're feeling it, it's okay. And you're not alone. All right. So that wasn't too icky, was it? I hope not. And if you're suffering with something like this, even if it's, again, just a breakup or divorce, not just, if it is a breakup or divorce, there's no just in grief. Okay. Your grief is yours. And if it's there, it's present and it's real. But if it's a breakup or a divorce and you're really grieving the loss of the sexual part of the relationship, that's okay. That doesn't make you icky or a pervert or, a sexual deviant by any stretch of the imagination. It's perfectly normal. Because again, sex can be a very intimate thing between two people, and losing that intimacy is probably going to be one of the hardest things to get past. No. And losing that intimacy is hard. It really is, because intimacy is so important in a relationship. Okay. I think we've discussed that one enough, right? All right. Well, in that case, let's move on to the death deck. Woo! All right. I'm going to shuffle up cards here. I always drop a couple. Okay. Pick one at random. Oh my goodness. How timely, you guys. I'm very excited about this. As I'm recording this, well, I'll read it. Nikki, stop. Read the card. Would you consider donating your entire body to a body farm where natural decomposition is studied with significant benefits to forensic science? A, sure, my results might inspire another season of CSI. B, no, but I'm cool with organ donation. C, entire body? No way. I say timely because I actually just changed my final will recently. Not to this, but I've requested to have my body composted versus cremated. And yeah, that's why that just felt timely. This is different. This is body farms, which, again, end of life work is my passion. I could talk about it all day, but it's something really fascinating you can look into, and as an option for afterlife, to donate your body to a body farm. Basically, they just have bodies outside in different places and different environments to study decomposition, so that they have things like that on hand for forensic science. Yeah, it's a little CSI-y, but that's how they get the information of when a body is found. They can tell how old it might be based on the environment it's in because of studies they've done on these body farms. So it's super important. Something to think about if you have no other plans with your corpse when you're gone. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you got a little something out of this episode, and if not, no harm, no foul. You can always find me at nikkithedeathdoula.com. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Nikki the Death Doula. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time. If you have anything you'd like me to discuss or topics, anything like that, I'd love to hear them. Even just funny stories. I love those. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Oh, and Patreon. Oh my gosh. How could I possibly forget the Patreon? Don't forget to find me on patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. All the proceeds from my Patreon go to a fund so that I can provide pro bono work to those who cannot afford my services. All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, just remember, your grief is yours, your feelings are valid, and grief doesn't always have to suck. Good Grief was brought to you by me. You can find me online at nikkithedeathdoula.com. Today's episode was produced by me. Research and scripts written by me. Your host is me. Editing and sound design also me. Music is not me. Music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod. License information can be found at filmmusic.io/standard-license. Special thank you to my best friend and husband for constantly reassuring me that I don't suck.